Hi, I'm Kojo the Christian Tech Guy. Today I'm going to be going through why I think micro SD expandability on smartphones should be a thing going forward. Now, you may see in reviews sometimes it will be a negative given for a phone that it doesn't have micro SD expandability. But then when you ask the reviewer themselves, they've never even put a micro SD card into their phone, either because they own a Nexus, so they can't do it, or they've owned some of the previous generation Moto X's, so again, they haven't had that option there. And I think mainly because they don't keep their phones for 2 years like the average consumer, and they're chopping and changing the phone so frequently that they don't really need to use a micro SD card. And it's not for everybody, but I think for the general population, particularly as we're going forward, there's less need to really upgrade your phone after a year or after even 2 years. Sometimes it seems that with the way that the industry is going and how technology is kind of slowing down a little bit, that your phone generally, the storage it has will get filled up. And if you don't have a micro SD card, that's either going to entail deleting things off your phone or trying to find other solutions. But in this video I'm going to try and explain how some of those other solutions aren't really up to scratch, and just give some of the use cases or the bonuses of having micro SD card expandability. So let's start off by saying why the alternatives to a micro SD card aren't so good when compared to just having a micro SD card. The first one is, we have the cloud now. You can store everything in the cloud. You don't need to store everything locally. And I think that's not a solid alternative for 5 reasons. Yeah, there's 5 reasons. So the first one is, if you're on the low data, having cloud access isn't really that beneficial. So for example, I'm only on 1 gigabyte a month, which sounds paltry, I know. And if I relied on the cloud for everything, such as, when I'm listening to music, when I'm out and about, when I'm saving photos or videos, when I'm out and about, when I'm doing anything that requires, connecting to the cloud and I'm out and about, that's just not a very good alternative to just, saving it onto my locally stored micro SD card. Reason number 2 is battery life. Being connected to the data, keep being connected to data continuously and streaming music via that method. It's probably worse for your battery life than just having it stored locally and not having to rely on the data to stream music. So it's not good for battery life when compared to a micro SD card. Number 3, if you live in an area that has poor signal, or you're walking around in an area that has poor signal, again, you're not going to be able to rely on the cloud in the same way that you can rely on a micro SD card, which is not relying on your phone signal. Number 4, privacy concerns. When you're storing things onto the cloud, it's not as safe as when you locally store your pictures, for example. When you store it into the cloud, we've seen recently how that it can be hacked, there can be leaks, and it's not as secure in that way than just storing it locally. And 4 reasons. Yeah, that was 4 reasons for cloud, for the cloud argument, not 5. Sorry. My second argument for an alternative which isn't as viable as micro SD expandability is that phone manufacturers should just make phones available with bigger base storages. So let's scrap 16 gigabytes completely. Definitely get rid of 8. Let's make 32 the base and preferably even 64. Now, there's 2 arguments against that alternative when compared to micro SD card. Firstly, we've seen that with the base storages being increased, you generally see, for example, with the iPhone, you see $100 increase, and I'm not sure what it is in pounds, sorry, but you see $100 increase between each base jump, and that can be 32 to 64 gigabytes and 64 to 128. And you can get a micro SD card for a fraction of that price. So economically, for the average consumer, when you're really wanting to choose between, you know, a base device, a base storage of like 64, let's say, and being able to just buy a micro SD card that has 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes even, it's going to be much cheaper than having to pay that extra amount to get to the next storage amount. And you can generally actually end up with more storage than, you know, what you can actually get with the next base storage amount. So no, it's not good for the consumer economically wise when you compare it to buying a micro SD card. And then the second reason is sometimes it's simply not viable for OEMs to make so many different storage versions of their device, or even to, you know, start at a higher storage capacity and then, you know, try and make their phones still, you know, accessible or still available to the more price conscious among us. If they just made it, okay, 64 gigabytes, you're not going to be seeing these really cheap mid-range devices that are really good, they perform really well, they have some really nice screens and etc. But they're going to not cost the same amount because now we're starting at 32 or 64 as opposed to 16 gigabytes. So yeah, that's the two reasons for the alternatives, and they just simply don't really compare to, you know, just having a micro SD card. It's easier for the consumer, it's easier for the OEM that, you know, can't afford to have a carrier place, you know, 3 different storage size devices in their stores, or, you know, make so many different amounts of their phones in these maybe 3 different base storage bands, because they simply don't have the market share to be able to make that economically viable for themselves. So that's the alternatives. Now let's, as a way of a reminder to those who do keep their phones for 2 years or longer, the bonuses of having a micro SD card. So particularly, I want you to kind of bear this in mind. If you live in the UK and you're watching this, so you live where I live, UK, you all know that, or you remember that last year, pretty much all the flagships that came out, or the Android flagships that came out, generally were only at 16 gigabytes. So I'm talking about the Galaxy S5, the HTC One M8, the LG G3, the Sony Xperia Z2 and Z3 and Z2 as well. They came out at 16 gigabytes. Maybe in the US, I generally saw they had 32 gigabytes as their kind of base storage amount. But last year, generally 16 gigabytes was all you could really buy. And if you know 16 gigabytes, that's paltry. So most people are coming from really small, even for flagships of last year, small memory capacities. And if you're buying a mid-range device, that's generally just going to be par for the course. You're either going to get 8 or 16. And if you don't have a micro SD card, then, well, you're going to have to sacrifice or have a lesser experience than if someone had a micro SD card in their phone. So, storing music. Some music that I've either downloaded myself or bought myself that I have on my computer, for example, or even, you know, bought from the Google Play Store. I'm able to download it onto the micro SD card, thereby saving internal memory space by just saving it on the micro SD card. And that's quite a few gigabytes of music as well. So if you are someone with maybe 8 gigabytes of music and you want to keep it all on your phone, but your phone is only 16, and then you factor in that the manufacturer has already, the operating system, already takes up some of that space, and then you need some apps on top that take up that space, well, you're probably not going to be able to fit 8 gigabytes of your music onto your device, and therefore you've either got to sacrifice some things or make a choice, or use the alternatives that aren't that good. Having a micro SD card means you can save it on your SD card, not even worry about it affecting your internal memory. Movies, again, if you have downloaded them or even bought them from the Google Play Store. Now, this is something they need to fix either on HTC side or on Google side. For some reason, when you download, try to download it onto your micro SD card, you can't play it back. I don't know why. But if they do fix that, or if it does work on your device, you're able to buy a movie from the Google Play Store, and download it straight onto your phone. Therefore, if you're on the train, somewhere you want to watch a movie, or you're in bed or whatever, you can just watch it without having to be connected to the internet, or relying on that internet, particularly if you have a low data amount, to watch your movie. Pictures, particularly if your phone is capable of taking raw pictures, they take up a lot of memory, and if you're snapping away like you do a normal photo, or if you're, you've gone to a wedding, you're taking loads of photos, you're on holiday, taking loads of photos, this is going to take up a lot of space, and you can't particularly if you're on holiday and you're worried about all the data roaming charges and stuff, you're not going to be relying on the cloud. You need to make sure you've got enough space on your device, and if you have a micro SD card, it's not really a worry, because it's saving onto something that you can have 128 gigabytes worth of, or 64 or 32 for quite cheap as well. Apps. Now, for me personally, so my device is a 16 gigabyte device. I've got a 32 gigabyte SD card, micro SD card inside it. And if I don't have enough space to save all my apps onto. Thankfully, you're able to save some data from some apps onto your micro SD card. Now, what does happen though is when you do update it, it goes back to internal storage, but you can move them across again by just going into the settings. If I didn't have a micro SD card, I probably wouldn't have at least 12 apps that I do have right now. And I've actually had to delete some apps because they don't save onto the micro SD card, they only save internally, and I don't have enough space for them anymore. Voice recordings. If you are someone who likes to make a lot of voice recordings, or you record yourself either singing or playing an instrument, having a micro SD card makes it a lot easier to just save it locally without affecting your internal storage size, and keeping that for apps that need to be saved on the internal storage. And finally, if you need documents kind of like your CV or some music sheets or songs or lyrics or whatever, and you want to make sure, particularly if it's your CV, you want to make sure you have it with you at all times, so that you could either send it to someone, email it to someone, attach it to something. Saving it onto your micro SD card means you don't need to worry about deleting it or whatever. It's just straight onto it's on your device. It's ready to go. So micro SD cards, we've seen this year Samsung omit it from the S line and from the Note line. We've seen OnePlus One or OnePlus 2 omit it. We've seen other devices as well, Xiaomi and Apple, of course, not include micro SD expandability. And it has a lot of advantages, some of which I think reviewers don't really know themselves, I feel, at times. But if you're like me, you're buying a device on a contract, 2 years, you're keeping that device, you're accumulating a lot of maybe cash, a lot of data, kind of almost gunk data. You share a lot of pictures via WhatsApp or whatever, Facebook Messenger. And all these things are storing locally and taking up a lot of space. You like listening to your music. Having a micro SD card it's almost a no-brainer to have it. And I think a lot of people say, oh, but it slows down the device and etc. etc. But generally, from what I know, devices slow down over time anyway. So a micro SD card's not necessarily going to be the be-all and end-all. It slows down. Yeah, everything slows down after a bit of time. And it's a no-brainer to just be able to save your music, save your data, save your pictures locally. It just makes so much more sense to just enable that, and that's why it's quite a key feature to a lot of people, and it's also a deal breaker for a lot of people because its versatility and its advantage is quite big. So that's all I have to say on the matter. I think going forward, manufacturers, I hope, will keep the micro SD cards, and I hope that people like Google would actually push on with developers being able to make sure their app can be saved on a micro SD card, enabling people to keep as much apps on their phone that they like, particularly when the maximum barrier of data or space that an app can take is actually increasing. We're seeing apps now, particularly games, 2 gigabytes, 3 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes of storage, and if you're on a 16 gigabyte device or even a 32 gigabyte device, you're not going to be able to keep those amount of games on your device. You're going to have to be uninstalling every other day, the way things are going. So yeah, I've been Kodjo the Christian Tech Guy. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with others if you so wish, and also subscribe to this channel as well to see other videos I'll be making in the future. I'm Kodjo the Christian Tech Guy. Thank you and God bless.